There are a number of reasons why Prohibition emerged at the end of the Progressive Era. Prior to the passage of the 18th Amendment and the Volstead Act, many states already had various forms of prohibitions on the sale, manufacture, and transport of alcoholic beverages. The 18th Amendment and the Volstead Act simply represented a continuation of an existing political trend. The 19th century and early 20th century temperance movement had changed its focus from one of individual abstinence to a new position dedicated to the elimination of institutions related to alcohol consumption. Campaigners such as the Anti-Saloon League of America and the Women's Christian Temperance Union were extremely effective at generating publicity and applying pressure to state and national legislators. Prohibition, in one sense, also embodied a conflict between urban and rural America. The waves of immigrants who arrived in American cities in the 19th century exacerbated nativist sentiments. Many prohibition groups made the logical leap to associate crime and what they perceived to be the immorality of American cities with large immigrant populations. Interestingly, the First World War indirectly served as a factor in the emergence of Prohibition. The banning of the production of alcoholic beverages, proponents argued, could allow additional resources, particularly the grain that would be used to produce alcohol, to be used for war needs, especially in feeding Allied troops. The 1918 poster on this slide suggested that American brewers were more destructive to the war effort than even German submarines, and the poster accused producers of alcohol of undermining the war effort. This cartoon from the First World War is typical of wartime propaganda related to the Prohibition movement. The cartoon suggests that alcohol causes poverty, that it hurts women and children, that it fills jails and insane asylums, and that it wastes grain. The barrels in the cartoon, dehumanized barrels, wear stereotypical German clothing. The implication is being made that anyone who consumes alcohol is thus unpatriotic and perhaps even treasonous. Prohibition produced a wide variety of side effects that few people at the time were correctly able to predict. Chief among these was the almost immediate rise of an illegal liquor industry to meet the demand of American consumers for alcoholic beverages. A number of studies indicate that alcohol consumption significantly rose during Prohibition, and entrepreneurial-minded individuals were in no short supply to profit from the sales and production of illegal alcohol. The 1921 image on this slide depicts police in St. Louis dumping out barrels of corn mash from an apartment window. Moonshine is a term used to describe alcohol secretly distilled using common household items. The term moonshine predates the Prohibition era. It is probably derived from the idea that smugglers and distillers worked late at night to avoid detection, i.e. by the light of the moon. Due to impurities introduced in the fermentation process and distillation process, hundreds of Americans each year died from harmful illegal alcohol in the decade of the 1920s. Most frequently, these were people who consumed alcohol that contained dangerous amounts of methanol, a substance that is poisonous to the central nervous system, and it can lead to blindness, coma, and even death. Some distillers used old automobile radiators in the distillation process, and batches of moonshine were sometimes contaminated from the lead solder from the radiators or the antifreeze that remained at the bottom of the radiators. By 1929, an estimated 700 million gallons of beer were being brewed in American homes, while informal domestic wine production during this time period also skyrocketed. Smugglers known as bootleggers profited by distributing illegal alcohol in the United States. The term bootlegging probably emerged during the Civil War, when soldiers would smuggle liquor into army camps by hiding bottles in their boots or under their pant legs. The term rum runner is more often used when describing smugglers who used boats to transport alcohol over open waters. Pictured on this slide is a photograph of a bootlegger displaying his wares in the 1920s. Given the fact that the United States has such lengthy borders, it was almost impossible to significantly affect the flow of illegally imported alcohol into the country. Smugglers such as William McCoy made incredible fortunes by transporting alcohol from Canada and the West Indies. Speakeasies were secret saloons people would create in cellars or hidden back rooms of homes or otherwise legitimate businesses. The term refers to the tendency people had of speaking quietly about such establishments in public, or when they were inside the illegal saloon, to try to stay quiet so as to not alert the neighbors or the police about what was going on. Typically, patrons had to provide a password, or they had to knock at the door in a secret code to be permitted to enter a speakeasy. Speakeasies sold bootleg alcohol smuggled into America from abroad, though occasionally some speakeasies also worked as their own distillers. Prior to Prohibition, there were approximately 15,000 bars and saloons in New York City, but by 1926 there were between 30,000 and 100,000 speakeasies. The exact number, of course, is difficult to determine due to the secreted nature of the business and the fact that these facilities tended to pack up and move if they thought a raid was imminent. The enormous profits to be made in the illegal alcohol industry attracted gangsters. Gradually, gangsters began to take control of many cities due to the money they could use to buy protection and influence from police agencies, from judges and politicians. Typically, at least in the larger cities, they controlled the speakeasies and the distilleries, and they ruthlessly exterminated any business rivals or perceived enemies. By the mid-1920s, for example, Al Capone was earning approximately $60 million a year from his illegal activities. His gang was something like a private army with over 700 armed men under his control. While Capone, at least publicly, preferred to use diplomacy over violence to achieve his business goals, he may have been responsible for as many as 500 murders, either by his own hand or more often through his orders and the work of his individual army. On February 14th of 1929, Capone's men dressed as police officers and murdered 7 members of a rival gang. This became known as the Valentine's Day Massacre, and victims of the massacre are depicted in this image. And this brings to a close our brief look at Prohibition in America.